Let's have a look at this story from Australia. Facebook has blocked Australian users from sharing or viewing news content on the platform, causing much alarm over public access to key information. It comes in response to a proposed law which would make tech giants pay for news content on their platforms, as Australian authorities attempt to level the playing field between the tech giants and struggling publishers over profits. Australians woke up this morning to find that Facebook pages of all local and global news sites were unavailable. Several government health and emergency pages were also blocked, something Facebook later asserted was a mistake. Let's speak with James Ball, global editor at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism and author of The System: Who Owns the Internet and How It Owns Us. James, afternoon to you. Let's just start with this point. Who gets their news from Facebook anyway?
I mean, all too many of us, clearly, for quite a lot of major news sites. Facebook can be an even bigger driver of traffic than Google. It's not always necessarily to the best quality news. It's often, celebrity or gossip or something quite divisive. But it is a big source of news for a lot of people's diet. Although most of us, even those of us who get news from Facebook, don't really think of it as a quality source of news. Yeah. It's not the most trusted.
I guess it could also be, it's not really a case that you say, right, I want to know what's going on in the news, I'll just fire up Facebook. It's the sort of inadvertent things you might read while you're there. So, for example, we still put a post on Facebook, despite the fact that nobody under the age of about 73 seem to use Facebook these days. We still stick a daily post on there because it does still garner really good comments. So that's a news story that we post and a link to one of the national newspapers on that story. That would be considered, somebody seeing the news, I guess.
Exactly that. It's as you say, no one sort of does an intentional thing of, I want the day's headlines, I better fire up Facebook. People go through their feed to see, you go on it when you're bored.
Yep.
And again, as you say, it's actually mostly older internet users now. People are locked in. They want to see either some memes or they want to sort of see someone's cat pictures. And there might be some news in amongst, and it diverts you.
Yep.
And so that's, if you're in Australia, that bit of your feed's not there anymore.
Indeed. And what's interesting about this is that I don't know how this plays to people outside news and the media, but it's been a debate, as you know, James, for some time. I mean, the BBC have found themselves accused of this in the sense that their dominance, stops smaller publications from succeeding. It actually, a state-funded monopoly like the BBC eradicates competition because of the sheer power, its sheer size. And similarly, I suppose with this, what's happening is Facebook are able to get a lot of content for absolutely nothing. That's the nuts and bolts of it. And the Australians are going, well, why would you be allowed it for nothing? Nobody else is.
And that's sort of the problem with their complaints about what Facebook's done. Facebook very obviously shouldn't have knocked out government pages. It also knocked out some of its own pages. They were clearly clumsy about this.
Yeah.
I struggled not to laugh when they said that was a mistake. It's like, no S Sherlock.
Yes, indeed. Took down the COVID advice and things like that.
But essentially, if you're saying to Facebook, hey, you get way more value out of these links to our site than we do, you've got to pay us if you want to use them. Facebook tries saying, actually, we don't get that much value for them. We don't really love it in the feed. If, we don't want to pay for it, they then try and get the government to force them. And so Facebook's gone, okay, if you think that we're getting a better end of this deal, we'll just take you off. And the response has been very outraged. And I think it's a bit difficult if you're saying pay up or don't use it. And they go, okay, we won't use it, to say that this is horrible and unfair.
I mean, could we, because the positive upshot of this, James, as I see it, is that it could mean that we return to Facebook just being good old-fashioned cat videos, and therefore we don't even think about it as a news service, directly or indirectly. And that leaves news services able to kind of get on with it. And so everybody would be a winner, right? If Facebook claim it's no biggie to them, then those news channels that feel their stuff was being taken elsewhere people will seek it out from its original source, in theory.
Exactly. That's if the news outlets are right and Facebook wasn't generating any value for them, then this should be fine. As you say, people will seek out news. I think what's worrying them is that in reality, some of those people who click through from Facebook to view news websites wouldn't have come otherwise. And what happens if Facebook looks at Australia and goes, you know what, people actually scroll through their feeds longer when there isn't news on it. People aren't quite as angry. We don't have as many moderation problems. Why don't we remove news everywhere? And I suspect actually here, the industry tried to pretend that Facebook was parasitical on them. And actually, my suspicion is overall, people would rather have the Facebook traffic than not. And so I wonder, you know the old phrase, the dogs that caught the taxi, something that chases after something and doesn't know what to do if they catch it. I think at the moment the Australian media are very angry that they got exactly what they were supposedly asking.
Yes, indeed. James, thank you. James Bull, Global Editor at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. It is a funny one because to me, the power of, not all of this was by design. I mean, some conspiracy theorists will tell you it was by design, but certainly the sheer power of Silicon Valley when it comes to areas such as Facebook and Google and Twitter and all that kind of goes with it is so vast, and it doesn't really penetrate the daily conversations that much unless you follow this kind of thing and look at the kind of influence that these big tech companies have, the dominance it has on news, often regional news elsewhere. How many people are reading the Manchester Evening News when they're getting that feed directly or indirectly through other means? So they'll catch those stories, but they'll catch them on Twitter, or they'll see them on Facebook, for example. So they're au fait with what's going on, but just through a different mechanism. All the ad revenue doesn't go to the Manchester Evening News or whoever. It goes straight to Facebook or to Twitter. So you can see the kind of problems. I mean, sometimes people will click on a link and maybe there is a payoff ultimately for those newspapers. Who knows? But maybe that's what we need. Do we need social media to go back to, well, just, funny kitten videos, please? Forget trying to do the news, because all you've done with news is actually you've confused news, you've conflated news, you've exaggerated news, and you've published fake news. So on whatever side of the fence you're on, you're all guilty of this stuff. You can't control it. It's a monster you've got out there. Nobody can control it. So is that the way forward? None of these feeds will ever give you news. Well, you couldn't, could you really? Because then somebody posts something, and how do you distinguish what is or what isn't news? It's a conundrum.